What's up, y'all? Wes Rucker from GoVols247 here for the GoVols247 Podcast with Ben McKee. How you doing? Hope you're doing all right. You're probably, if you're a Tennessee fan, you're probably not doing all right. But that is life in the Southeastern Conference. You go on the road, you don't play well, and you get what Tennessee got on Saturday night over in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Ben, the fourth-ranked Vols, fourth ranked for now, fell 19-14 at Arkansas in a game that you always, at least for me, Ben, in these situations, you always want to go try to find some kind of a middle ground, right? Of saying maybe things aren't always as bad as you think or as good as you think. That was pretty bad from Tennessee. That was a game that Tennessee just had no real business losing, but really was fortunate to be in the game at halftime. Then absolutely played well there for about 6 or 7 minutes there to open the second half. Goes up by 2 scores, and you think that, well, there go the Vols. They got that straightened out, and then they didn't score any more from that point forward. Monumental, colossal breakdowns really on offense, defense, and special teams along the way, and quite an opportunity for Tennessee this game was. You had Mizzou opening the day with the loss, then Bama goes to Vanderbilt and loses, and Georgia's already lost the game, and so many things are right there open for Tennessee, and it's still a lot of season left. But, Ben, that was a bad loss.
Yeah, the season's not over because of the extended playoffs, but hard to think of the positives right now. And really, within an hour and a half to 2 hours of the game ending, should not be focusing on the positives, in my opinion, with how poor of a game that was. There will be a time for that conversation. And look, Tennessee's going to have to flush this one as quick as possible because they have a huge rivalry game next weekend inside of Neyland Stadium that we will be in the Neyland Stadium press box at this time next Saturday night reacting to that game against Florida. So they're going to have to move on in a hurry, and we'll have plenty of time to talk about how there's still a lot to play for this season, which is the absolute truth. But that doesn't change the fact that tonight was just an ugly loss for Tennessee. They looked unprepared. They were unorganized. They looked like a team that was too comfortable, got too comfortable over the open week. Looked like a team that was reading their press clippings, not literally, but that's obviously a figure of speech in the sports world, but just looked like a team that was feeling themselves a little too much and thought that they were just going to roll into Fayetteville and roll the helmet out there and be perfectly fine. And I thought from start to finish they were unorganized and unprepared and just really sloppy. And it's really disappointing because you were coming off the open week. You were a very fresh and healthy football team, and Arkansas playing its 6th straight game, not a fresh football team, not a healthy football team, and Tennessee was not ready from the jump, and Arkansas was. I don't think Arkansas played good football, but they weren't necessarily shooting themselves in the foot in the manner that Tennessee was. There was just a lack of playmaking ability, I felt, with Arkansas there in the first half. The score should have been much larger than what it actually was. It should not have been 3-0. It should have been larger than that in Arkansas's favor. The defense, I thought, did not come out of the gates very well. I thought they got much better as the game went on, and then got put in a tough spot there at the end. We can dive into that a little bit more later on. But from start to finish, the offense just looked abysmal outside of those 2 offensive possessions there in the third quarter. And we'll talk about Nico. He obviously had a very bad night, but just big picture, I thought every position unit on the offensive side of the ball had a tough night, maybe outside of Dylan Sampson and Deshaun Bishop. But even Deshaun Bishop, he had a nice couple of runs, but also missed a pass pro.
Big one.
Had a bust that led to a punt, if I remember correctly, because Nico was not able to step into his throw. I thought the receivers had a poor game on top of getting banged up throughout. The offensive line, pitiful performance from them. Nico, again, did not play well. Just an overall bad performance from the offense, and hard not to think that our thoughts on the offense were a result of the opponents that they were playing and not reality. I think now in hindsight, obviously, it's pretty obvious that this offense is not what we thought it was in a lot of different areas. But overall, just really unfortunate coming off the open weekend. You look that unprepared and that unorganized from start to finish.
Yeah, I think that there's so many things, Ben, both from like a micro and a macro perspective that could be discussed. We'll hit on as many of them as we can here in the postgame podcast. Obviously, Monday we'll probably have a little bit more time to have seen some stuff from that game again, and we'll be able to maybe add some perspective on some things. But yeah, I mean, I think to your point, this is a game for sort of you Googleizing that opportunity that it was for Tennessee, and just flat out not good, not good. To look that way, I don't know what it is. My biggest question with the offense is one that I would absolutely have to go watch the game again before really understanding this. But I don't know if that was too conservatively called or if that was Nico Iamaleava being way too timid with his decision making, or it was both. There's not a fourth option. There's not. I don't see a fourth option there. I think anytime a result happens in a game, you look at the team that won, and then you look at the team that lost, and you give credit, to the team that won the game. That team won the football game, and it made the plays it needed to in the fourth quarter, and it won the game. So you have to tip your cap there because Arkansas is a team that has just been so abysmal in one-score football games since Sam Pittman has been there. And Tennessee had knocked its quarterback out of the game and still could not get it done against a quarterback who could barely run the offense there late in the game. The snaps were errant, and he wasn't really collecting them that great. I didn't trust him to throw the ball whatsoever until they absolutely needed to, and he made, I think, one pass. Just not for the game to get to that point. That should not have happened. But then it gets to that point, and there was a stretch there in that last possession, Ben. We're always going to think about what happened last, right? This podcast, we should talk about everything that happened or that we can, but you go to the end of the game. And for me, the amount of time that was elapsed between that 42-yard pass to Dante Thornton Jr. and then the end of the next play, when you have 2 timeouts in your pocket with about 30, 40 seconds on the clock, you cannot do that. And I don't know what they were thinking with some of those clock management things. I mean, it shouldn't have come to that, but when it does, you have to make the play and you have to make the smart decision. And I don't think they did. And then for the second time in a couple of years or second time in 3 years, Tennessee gets to the end of a football game and on the final play needs a touchdown to win or extend it or whatever, and did not get a throw into the end zone, this time from the 20-yard. Tennessee had just taken a timeout and had discussed that. And I'm sure Heupel told him, Nico, you got to put the ball in the end zone there. But to me, that hurts a little bit less than it did with Milton, because Milton at that point was an older quarterback. Nico's a younger quarterback. We should factor that into it. But there should not have been 17 or 18 seconds left with a few plays left in that game. I don't know how that was managed the way that it was, but I have questions there that's not a good look.
No, it's not. And look, it was a bad look for Nico to not get a throw off there. You cannot run out of bounds in that situation. I recognize that. I will give him a little bit of grace. To your point, he is a younger quarterback than Joe. And here was Nico's explanation on the final play of the game when he met with the media following the game. He said that as I rolled out, I saw Dante Thornton Jr. He was coming open, but if I threw that ball, it was going to be batted down right away. So I tried to let Brazel work a little bit, and he was covered at the time. And as soon as I was trying to let the ball go, I felt it slipping in my hand. I've got to do a better job at holding the ball.
Which would be the second time in a few plays that happened, because they also had to hand it off to Dylan Sampson on a busted play when Nico couldn't handle the snap, like two plays before that.
Yes. Now, that it wasn't because he dropped the foot. He was scrambling to get lined up because they didn't know what the play call was with like 4 seconds on the play clock, and he was – I feel like that was a slightly different if that one makes sense. But no doubt, like that just cannot happen. And it just put a bow on what was an ugly performance from Nico. And in terms of your original point of the play calling and how the game was called, I personally did not have necessarily an issue with play calling itself. And when I say that, I'm not saying that Tennessee's coaches called a good game. I'm saying that and recognizing that they were conservative for a second consecutive game. And this may be an unpopular opinion, but I don't blame them for being conservative because the personnel is not what everybody thought the personnel was, particularly up front with the offensive line. And they were, and it again, I'm hoping people don't take this and think I'm only blaming this group. Nico played a poor game. The coaches called a poor game. I just don't think that that was the main issue, because I thought they were right to punt it away and not go for it on fourth down. You
that
have a
was hard.
backup quarterback in the game, a backup kicker. You have Jackson Ross. Your defense was playing well in the second half. Lean on your defense, and it just didn't work out in your favor. And that offensive line, it did not have a good night at the office, and much like the Oklahoma game, it was on. Nico was getting hit. A team that does not sack the quarterback entering the game was sacking the quarterback. There weren't, in my opinion, based off of the protection, not only in the passing game but also the holes that were being opened in the running game. There just wasn't a lot of opportunity to make plays because Tennessee was getting beaten up in the trenches. So I don't necessarily have a problem with the play calling. Where I have an issue with the coaches is with the game management and
Yes.
what you were talking about with the timing of the clocks and some of those decisions, not calling timeouts right away here and there, snapping the ball with. I mean, you're trying to run clock, and okay, like I can understand throwing the football because there is a thought process to maybe going and getting that first down, and instead of just being super conservative and run, make them burn their timeouts. Like I didn't necessarily have a problem with throwing the football. I had the bigger problem with the clock's running. You're trying to run clock and you're snapping the ball with 25, 30 seconds left on the shot clock. Like, why is that happening? That was more. I had a bigger issue with the game management, clock management aspect of things than I did the play calling.
No, I agree. And that's exactly something I want to be clear about this. This is something that I would be saying at this exact time if Nico had made a play on the final game and on the final play and won the game. I would be saying these exact same things because it's that concerning to me that I understand that there's a certain element in coaching where you want to be unpredictable. You want to kind of zig when the opponent zags, and that's something that when Tennessee's in its offense and in rhythm and Heupel's in his bag, like they're really really good at that. But there were times tonight, especially in that fourth quarter, where I'm wondering why are you not running more clock when you have the lead, and why are you not in a bigger hurry late in the game when you need to have more urgency? And that to me, it's an alarm bell. I mean that Josh Heupel has done so much more good than bad since he's been at Tennessee. Full stop. He has. There's no debating that. But at least once a year, you see one of these things on the road. And for Tennessee to get from where it is now to where it wants to be, that's got to stop. I don't know what exactly has gone into that. And again, I think there were times in this game where there were opportunities for Nico to make plays and he didn't make them. I think we need to be clear about that. He misses what could have been a touchdown to Squirrel White. Down that shot play, third and 7 down the left sideline there. A couple other times where I think he maybe could have run and didn't. A couple times where the middle of the field looked kind of open and he had a play there and he didn't see him. There were not a lot, but enough of those plays that were concerning to me. But that's why I said I'm not sure about whether they were being overly conservative with him, or whether he was being timid because things got to him. He felt that pressure up front. The offensive line played a really, really bad football game. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. It was bad. And they got too much experience and too much talent to be like that in that spot. They can't do that. That's just not good enough. And they got to figure out why. But for me, the management of it, there's just been some times on the road since Heupel's been the coach at Tennessee. And it hasn't happened every time they've been on the road, but there's a few times that we've seen this at least once a year where they go on the road and it looks like, what in the hell have y'all been doing in practice this week? No one looked really prepared for hardly anything. And then he was kind of coaching with kind of, he was being timid and then he was being aggressive. And then I get it. He's trying to get something going, but that to me, Ben, is alarming. And I know Ryan Callahan and Patrick Brown, two of our coworkers, are there. Sometimes with these road games late at night, far away, we send about half the staff and we keep half the staff here because there's different things we have to manage. But they asked some questions. Heupel had some answers. We've got them up on the site. Nico, to his credit, came out and talked too. And so we have reaction from all that up on the site right now. But I just don't, this is college football and weird things happen. Look, at least 3 top 10 teams, maybe a fourth if Miami keeps this up as we're recording, will have gone on the road and lost today. And it's not like Tennessee lost at Vandy. It lost at Arkansas. There's levels to this, but they can't lose that game. And if they had just been a little bit more efficient and a little smarter, Ben, they probably would have won that game.
Yeah, they probably would have, but they weren't.
They didn't. So now we got to ask why.
The penalties have to stop. That to me, like the clock management and the game management, I had a big issue with in this football game, like we just discussed. In addition, my biggest issue, I should say my second biggest issue, because my biggest issue with this game was just how you come out and look so unprepared and unorganized after an open week.
Maybe schematically outfoxed, maybe just schematically outfoxed a little bit.
I mean, they multiple offensive players and Josh Heupel said that Arkansas came out in a defense that they had not seen on tape. So there was certainly a wrench thrown at them to start the game. Heupel said that he felt like they adjusted well. I don't know that I would agree with that. Now, again, I don't think enough people are recognizing that the offensive line really put Josh Heupel and Joey Halsley and Nico in a poor situation. There's just not a lot that you can do. Even Dylan Sampson, I saw some about time Dylan Sampson got going. Well, what do you want Dylan Sampson to do when he has nowhere to run the football? So I thought the offensive line was the biggest issue in the first half. Not the only issue, but the biggest issue there in the first half. So, look, I mean, when you lose in that ugly of fashion, Wes, like you got outcoached as well, right? Your team wasn't prepared. I mean, every cliche in the book, the team wasn't prepared. He got outcoached in that manner, and then from a schematic standpoint as well, he got outcoached. But so my biggest issue with this football game was just how they looked coming off of an open week as a fresh football team against a tired, beat up football team. That baffles me how unprepared, unorganized they were coming off that open week, given those circumstances. My second biggest issue, and it continues to be the biggest issue I have with this program and Josh Heupel leading it, is the penalties. It's every single game. It's every single game, no matter who they are playing, where they are playing, home, away, neutral site, SEC team, ACC team, bowl game, FCS opponent, Division III school, high school opponent. There are too many penalties committed in every single game that they play. And it's baffling to me, for as good as they are on offense, how many pre-snap penalties they get on offense. And like, I get it. They run the up-tempo stuff. To me, that's a really, really poor excuse, because you practice the up-tempo all the time. Why are you jumping off sides when it's something that you practice all the time? That is something that has to get nipped in the bud, and I have zero confidence that it will get nipped in the bud, because it's been an issue the entire time Josh Heupel has been at Tennessee, and it was an issue before he got to Tennessee. That was one of the cons to him, I guess, if you want to put it in that sense, or one of the detractors to his offense, I should say, coming from UCF, was that his teams commit a lot of penalties, and we continue to see that. And there were a couple of of unfortunate ones. Like I think the Jordan Ross was just more unfortunate than stupidity.
It was a football moment, yeah.
He got blocked into the punter more than anything. If you go back and watch the replay, he gets chipped and he's kind of like trying to do an Olay to avoid the punter, and in the midst of doing the Olay, I felt like he got more pushed into the punter than him being stupid and hitting the punter. I thought that was more bad luck than anything. But it's the pre-snap penalties that are the most frustrating. How those continue to happen just baffles me. And they're going to have games like this every now and then until they nip it in the bud. And there hasn't been much confidence, or there isn't a lot of confidence inspired that they are going to get it corrected, because here and down in Orlando, it's something that's been a continuous problem for Josh Heupel.
Yeah, I don't want to minimize that at all, because if I could make like a Rushmore of concerns, that's absolutely on the Rushmore for me. But I think the reason it's not number one for me is because they do go really fast. And so I think you get a tiny bit more allowance when you run that fast. You're going to have maybe a couple more, not as many as they have, but you're going to have a couple more. And I think normally they get so many yards and points that it all comes out in the wash, and it's okay. That doesn't mean that it's not okay, is not the right word. It's not the worst. But to me, the just absolute, the thing that bothers me just tonight, as much as anything really, is that since Heupel's been at Tennessee, they've not really ever been timid. Like, they've made mistakes and they got beat when other teams have had better players. But like, to me, sins of like commission are one thing, but like sins of omission or something else. Like when you're being timid, when you're just letting something happen, that to me is always less excusable than seizing the initiative, being on your front foot, being aggressive. And I have an issue with that. But just on the road, man, it's hard on the road. It is. But you just can't have at least one of these every year. You cannot get where Tennessee wants to get by doing that. And that has to stop. I don't know, because that's to me something that's not just about this game. Like you said with the penalties, it's not about just this game. It's about a trend that you see. And for a quarterback to not throw the ball into the end zone again, that's not good. And the management of that game, not good. But I if what I'm saying makes sense, I mean, God, it's late. We're sitting here talking. It's really late, but I do think
it makes sense. It makes 1,000%, and I do think there was some timidness to everything that took place tonight. I do personally view it a little bit differently. I took it as them again being too comfortable and reading their press clippings a little too much, and I know I already know that fans aren't going to like this, but I don't think that like Heupel was calling plays scared. Well, I do think he was calling plays scared. I think he was calling plays scared because he doesn't trust his offensive line. I think Tennessee has an offensive line issue. Heupel knows that, and that's why you are seeing the play calls, because he is terrified of getting Nico killed or a fumble or kind of the pick six that we saw at NC State. So, like, yeah, technically he is coaching scared, but I don't think it's because it's his personality. I think he's scared of his offensive line getting him beat, if that makes sense.
No, it does. When you have an inconsistent offensive line paired with a young quarterback, that's an explosive situation, like in a
Because
bad
in
way.
any sport, Wes, like you can always tell how a coach feels about his team by the decisions that he makes in a game, no matter the sport, whether it's Rick Barnes and the decisions that he makes in games, or Tony Vitello and who he goes to in certain situations. I think you can always tell how a coach truly feels about his team by the decisions that he makes in game, especially with football and plays that are called. And this is now 2 games in a row where we've seen Heupel be more timid with the play calling than we have seen him be at Tennessee. And
when he had less talent at times too. He
Yes.
was more aggressive at times when he had less talent.
Yeah, that's a fair point, of course. And again, I want to emphasize I'm not 100% chalking it up to that, but in my eyes, and maybe I'm wrong, but that to me is the biggest issue. Is that I think Tennessee on offense, it's not the only issue, but they have an offensive line issue, and I think that is really limiting what they can call right now.
I think you're right about that. And I think there's a lot more we need to discuss about this game, and we will. But we are just a tiny bit overdue for a break. So this is a good point to go ahead and get that out of the way. We'll step away, pay some bills, listen to product services, in-house ads, etc. And then we'll come right back here and pick over the bones of this tough night for Tennessee a little bit more here on the GoVols247 podcast. Hashtag ad. Welcome back to the GoVols247 podcast, brought to you by whatever product, services, and in-house ads you just heard a moment ago during that commercial break. Wes Rucker coming to you from Fort Rucker Studio. Ben McKee coming to you from his home studio. Neither one of us is in Fayetteville tonight. That's where our coworkers Patrick Brown and Ryan Callahan are. But they are there, and we are here, and we are all picking over the bones of Tennessee's 19-14 loss, a really bad loss at Arkansas. No way around discussing that. No way. We're all adults here. We can call it what it is. It wasn't good enough, and Tennessee got a loss that, frankly, Tennessee earned. There was nothing. That game played the way it was, should have ended the way it did. Arkansas earned that one a little bit more than Tennessee did, and that's sports. The ball did not lie in the end. I think Arkansas was a little better, and it won the game. I think Tennessee's got a better roster, but I think Arkansas played a better game, and I think it fairly won the game. And we got a lot more to discuss about that after a quick request from our end to please go in there and rate and review and subscribe to this podcast wherever in the world you can cast a fine pod. You can find this podcast. You can also now find it on video there on YouTube, our YouTube page at GoVols247's YouTube page and GoVols247's Facebook page. You can go and get it in all of those places. So if you're watching it on video, please go ahead and subscribe. Please go ahead and mash that like button. Please leave a review. And especially if you're listening on the podcast services, please go in there and leave a fresh review and a rating. I'm telling you that there's nothing that helps us more than that. And just telling people about the podcast too. So if you got people in your life, I know you're going to be fuming about this one, and you're going to be talking to everybody that you know. And these Tennessee fans that you know, if they also need a place to go vent some frustrations and pick over bones, they can go do that right here. Please tell them about that. If you're already doing all that stuff, thank you so much. We love you. If not,
I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Ben, I think there were some things that were not terrible in that game, and I think we probably could spend about a minute discussing that before we dive back into how bad this was, because it was that bad. The defense in the first half, despite making a couple of really bad plays, also made some big plays, got some fourth down stops, kept the game at a manageable situation, and then turned the keys over to the offense and allowed them to get a 2-score lead in the second quarter, or third quarter. So that was not bad. Dylan Sampson, when he had some room, did some good things with it. So I think those things are fair. Jackson Ross had a couple of punts he'd like to have back, a couple of really nice punts though. And so there was some good mixed in with that bad, but if we're being honest, most of it was bad. And go ahead.
You finish and I can go.
No, I think early in that game, Arkansas was able to stop the run with a light box. And that's something that really, since Heupel's been at Tennessee, I can only remember Georgia kind of consistently doing that. Normally for teams to contain Tennessee's ground game, they have to load the box. And by doing that, they expose the back end to some big plays through the pass. And I think that got sorted a little bit, I think, in the second half. I think Tennessee was able to get more going on the ground. Sampson, when he had some time, I mean, there was times in that game where Tennessee had like 3 or 4 linemen to block 2 or 3 Arkansas guys, and they just didn't block them. And Sampson didn't have room to run. There was one play where I think if he makes a better cut, he's got a big play. But when he had opportunities, for the most part, I think he took advantage of them, and that was good. Nico, before that just horrendous final 20 seconds, did make a nice throw. Dante Thornton made a nice catch. That's a big play. If they manage the clock better, they have more time. And we're talking about how big of a clutch throw that was. There were no turnovers I can remember from Tennessee in this game. None forced either.
Neither team turned the ball over.
Yeah, so even in a game that was just an absolutely just a wet fart of a game, if I'm being honest, that's what it was. There were some things that were not terrible.
Yeah, there were, but I don't think Tennessee fans care too much about
I
those
just try to
things.
mention them a little bit. Like, even when Tennessee wins a big game, I try to say, hey, these couple things weren't good enough. So when they lose a game they shouldn't lose, I'm going to spend at least a second it's just the capital J, big J journalist in my head saying, hey, a couple things went okay. But yeah, it was overall not good.
Yeah, I thought Sampson was the only bright spot offensively. I know I've spent a lot of time in that first segment going on and on about the offensive line. I do think Tennessee has a significant offensive line issue, quite frankly. And I say that in regards to whether or not this team can be a playoff team. But it just was not the offensive line. I guess I would like to take some time to emphasize that. I don't think it was only the offensive line. I do think that the play calling was an issue at times. We talked about the clock management, the game management, but also the receivers. I think they are, as of right now, they are not the group that we thought that they were. There's been some nice plays. I thought Dante Thornton had a nice night. He had some really nice catches, just wasn't really available, it seemed, from start to finish because he tweaked something with his lower body early in the game.
Something around his knee or above his knee or something right around that. It was a knee-ish region. I'm a doctor here. So, yeah, Dr. West said it was knee-ish.
No. You always tell us you're not a doctor.
That's what I'm saying. But the fake Dr. West is saying it was a knee-like situation.
Gotcha. But other than that, I thought Dante made some nice plays actually.
Yeah.
But the receivers overall as a group, just Nico missed some throws. There's no doubt about that. He missed some open guys, and I don't know that he did a great job of going through his second progressions once he got through his first progression. And I don't know if that's more the style of offense that he's in, or if that's him not going through his progressions, but there are certainly
that's what I mean earlier. That's what I was talking about earlier. I'm not sure.
Right. There are certainly some throws missed. But it was a mixed bag because Nico missed some guys, and there were also guys not getting open. Patrick Brown and I were talking about that in our text thread. He obviously could see the whole field. We watching from home could not see the whole field, and he was saying that Nico was missing some open guys on digs, and Sampson on the second to last play was wide open, I would assume in the flat. If he dumped it off to him, then who knows how that final drive turns out. So there were some missed throws for sure, but there were also, from our vantage point watching at home, Wes, I don't know if you noticed, but every time that they would show a replay of Nico getting sacked or a third down play that Tennessee didn't execute, they'd be showing the receivers downfield and nobody was open.
No, that's absolutely true. And I think that from what we could see in those situations, again, maybe Pat's got that, when we're in the press box, normally that's an all 22 view basically. So you can see things that maybe, can't be seen even in 4K when you're looking at some of these splits and stuff because with the angles, but yeah, then you get into the whole situation of, well, is that where he's supposed to be looking or is it not? Or was he told not to throw it? I mean, there's all kinds of things that where we're not privy to. And I think in the media, sometimes we collectively as a media, like in sports worldwide, I think we make assumptions sometimes on things that we don't know exactly what's called. We don't know exactly what he's supposed to do. So there's levels to this, and we ask questions, and all we can do really is ask questions and get answers or not get them. But then we can analyze what we see. And
but Sampson was the only bright spot I thought that was on the offensive side of the football. And I do want to mention defensively, I thought it was a good night overall. I thought it took them a little while longer than you would like to get going. I thought the defensive line specifically played well for the majority of that football game, but I was disappointed in the play of the linebackers, especially early on. I thought they got better as the game went on, But I thought early in that game, Arkansas was just picking Tennessee apart in the middle of the field, and it was it was guys that were the responsible. It was the linebacker's responsibility or the safety's responsibility to cover, and they were just getting confused on who they were supposed to be covering. There were too many guys running free. There were some missed tackles. I was very disappointed in the linebackers early on in that football game. Now, I thought they got better as the game went on. I thought Arion Carter got better as the game went on after, I believe it was a mesh concept early in the game, and him and one of the DBs took the same guy when they probably should have swapped or switched or whatever, and that led to a big play. So I thought Arkansas, despite Tennessee's defensive line playing well early and kind of bailing the defense out in the first half, the reason Arkansas was able to get down the field is because they were picking on the middle of the field on those linebackers and safeties and producing some chunk plays. And that's what, in addition to all of the offensive issues and the penalties, that's also what I mean by I thought they looked unprepared and unorganized, because in that first half there were too many pieces on that Arkansas offense that I don't think is a very good offense running wide open for big chunk plays. And just being beat because the other guy has more ability than you is one thing. Being beat because you did not fulfill your assignment is just something that can never be okay. And there is a whole lot of that going on, just guys not fulfilling their assignments or covering the right guy early in that first half, and that was very frustrating to watch.
Yeah, for me, I think the things that you said about linebacker, I think that as well, but I almost think it more with the safeties in some situations. I think they just, again, I wonder if Tennessee is just structurally solid, but not dynamic enough there. I have questions about that. I mean, again, there's so much more athletic at corner, and we've seen that. There was a couple plays in this game where Jamal McCoy, you could not ask for better coverage than he had. And 3 times Green just absolutely dropped it in a bucket. Just beautiful throws. That guy is a fascinating mixture of great plays and horrible plays. But there was a few throws he made tonight that McCoy, you can't ask for anything more. And it just happened. And that's football. But I'm not bothered by that. I am bothered by sort of the lack of explosive plays at times from the middle of the field defensively. That's something that, again, we talked about Tennessee getting younger and more athletic at corner. They didn't really do it at secondary, at safety anyways. And I know Jordan Thomas got hurt. There's some things there, whatever. I get it. But yeah, the defense played better than the offense tonight, but the defense also left some plays out there. Like when you allow a, whatever it is, 20-yard pass on 3rd and like 14 from the other team's 1-yard line, like that, on no planet can that ever happen. And that happened. And there was a couple things that were just not good enough there.
Yeah, I thought the defense overall had a really good night, but in some ways, I do think that the box score is a little more friendlier than the actual play on the field. And now, with as crazy as college football is right now, I don't know who is a good team and who's a bad team, and who's a good offense, who's a bad offense. Normally, you'd say, well, against Alabama, Alabama went and lost to Vanderbilt at Vanderbilt earlier today. So I can't even say that in Georgia. I mean, they looked abysmal at Alabama last week. Looked better against the bad Auburn team today, but who knows who's good and who's not good nowadays. But for the sake of my point, against a better offense than the one that Arkansas has, that first half score looks a lot different. And it wasn't just the offense putting the defense in bad situations. There were some things in that first half that they got cleaned up over the course of the football game. But I'm sure there were some things that Tim Banks will be hammering home this week, because in in a different game against a better offense, that score gets a little lopsided early on, and looks like a much uglier loss than what tonight actually was.
Yeah, like, that one of the many reasons why Inside the NBA is like the best sports show on television and has been for years is one of their best segments, I think, is who he play for. When they're talking about, who's this veteran play for now, who he play for. With college football right now, it's kind of, are they any good now? Are they bad now? I don't know really. I mean, the Big Ten, there's obviously a big drop off between the top and the bottom of that conference. So there's some things maybe we won't know until later in the year. Well, with some of those guys, but in the SEC now, it's like,
it's Texas. Texas and Ohio State
Texas
are the
still
only
needs to play people, but yeah.
Yes, they do. But right now, Texas and Ohio State are the only two teams that I look at and I'm like, they're good. And to your point about Texas, Ohio State still hasn't played anybody.
Oh yeah, that's a given. That's a given, though, right?
Much like Ole Miss and Tennessee. And look what happened to Ole Miss against Kentucky. Look what happened to Tennessee against Arkansas. Because in hindsight, NC State's start to the season, what was telling in regards to Tennessee's win over them. Oklahoma, I don't think, is a very good football team. I think they're very average. And look what happened to Tennessee tonight. I don't know that there is really, I mean, outside of Texas and Ohio State, who, to your point, neither team has really played anybody. They're the only two teams that I feel comfortable saying are good off the top of my head. I don't think I'm leaving anybody out, which is, I guess, can be spun into a positive, as I mentioned off the top of the show, is that it feels like the season is over. The season is not over.
Oh God, no.
There's still a whole lot to play for, and I'm not going to say that all is forgiven, but if Tennessee turns around and beats Florida and Alabama in back-to-back weeks, Tennessee fans 2 weeks from this very moment will be feeling very, very good.
Oh yeah, and there's no question. Like for Tennessee now, it's all about, you gotta, as Rick Barnes would say, you gotta scrub this one out, right? You gotta go in there and you gotta watch tape and you gotta figure out what the hell happened and why it happened. And then the only thing that matters for the team is Florida. Like, we can talk about whatever the hell we want to talk about. That's all, like, their job is to focus on Florida and do all that. Like, we can sit here and say, listen, the fact of the matter is now you have to beat either Bama or Georgia or you're not getting in the playoff. So that's kind of, if you lose, 3 maybe of the 4 toughest games you play during the regular season, you're not getting in. So Tennessee's we know that. But Tennessee's got to focus on now is Florida. And one thing I think is interesting, I hate that Squirrel White got dinged up there late in the game. I also hate that Bryson Eason went down with that knee injury. That could be something to keep an eye on. That did not look
that
great.
Receiver room overall. I mean, Brew McCoy as well. Dante is going to have to manage something going forward. Yeah. Obviously, good that he got back in, and
Brew played with a cast.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier. It was a heck of a catch by Dante, heck of a play by Nico to spin out of pressure, and Kirk Herbstreit compared it to Pat Mahomes, and it was very Pat Mahomes like how he spun out and kept his eyes downfield and made a great throw, great catch. But even though he was able to come back in, I would imagine that's something he will have to manage these next couple of games.
And with that too, because Squirrel White went down, looked like he dinged his shoulder up pretty good there, pretty gnarly looking.
He was in a sling.
When you see somebody hold their arm like that, you just automatically go to, well, is that AC or rotator? Because it's one of the two, and neither one's good. So we'll see there. But I think, and again, this is not to pick on an individual. That was an all systems failure Tennessee had in this football game. But one of the questions I have, and I think it's a fair question, Tennessee attempts 28 passes in that game. 10 are thrown to Squirrel White. He catches 7 of them for 38 yards. What are you getting out of that? Like, I think it's fair to sit here and say, now, if the play's called there, that's not on Nico. I mean, that's he's throwing and we've said all the time that those swing passes are an extension of the run game, right? Sometimes they're not supposed to get 50 yards every time. They're supposed to be like a run play. And so it's not a disaster. So I want to be clear about that. And sometimes you run those to kind of get a team baited. And then once they start picking or sneaking up, then you go behind them. I understand all of that. But when you only throw 28 passes in a game, I don't know that 10 of them need to be going in that direction right now. And he might be hurt for a while. We'll see. We have no idea. But I don't know that that's the best formula right now for success. I mean, at that point, if that's what you're going to do, I just, put Dylan Sampson out in motion and throw that play to him, because at least he's a running back. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and tell one of the best offensive minds in college football how to run his offense. I don't know that that's the best distribution ratio that Tennessee needs right now.
No, and I mean, Squirrel needs to make some plays too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the
That's
receiver room.
saying.
The receiver room is not what I think a lot of people thinks that it is. Not that it's a bad one. I just don't. I think it. Look, and I'm blaming myself too. I mean, I had high hopes for this room and what was a little more glass half full than maybe I should be. I tend
most of us were.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm more of a glass half full and optimist, and I'm not wet blanket Callahan. So I'm going to see the good and choose to see the good, even maybe more than I should, before I choose to see the bad or think about what could go wrong. But even for me, like I'm not mocking anybody else. I'm even throwing myself under the bus when I say I don't think that this receiver room is what a lot of people think that it is. I don't think it has the playmakers that a lot of people think that it has. I think there have been guys who they're good college receivers, but they're not all SEC, all American caliber type of guys the way that they're talked about at times. Is my point. So it's something they got to get that room going somehow, some way. I don't think that they've been awful or bad or even as bad as last year by any stretch of the imagination. I just don't know that they know that I don't think that they know who they can rely on down in, down out at the moment. I think they know that with Brew, but Brew is banged up at the moment. He wasn't able to really go tonight after he got that hit and dealing with what appeared to be a wrist injury. Wrist was in the brace, as you mentioned. I think that they trust Brew, but outside of that, I don't think that they really know what they're getting down in and down out from any given guy in that receiver room. So they're going to have to figure that out because, Nico missed some throws and the offensive line is an issue at times, but the receivers are also not getting open at times. So that is something that is going to have to get corrected.
Yeah, and the last thing, at least that I got before we get out of here, Ben, is sometimes I think, I think one of the biggest cliches in sports, and we all do it. Every single one of us does it. We all do it. I do it. You've done it. We've all in the business done this, is to naturally, when a game goes the way that one went for Tennessee, you say, were they feeling themselves too much? Were they too high on themselves? Were they looking past this game? Excuse me. What's wrong with me? I think sometimes I need a drink of water here. Hold on one second.
Well, I think they were absolutely feeling themselves too much. I mentioned
that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
I mentioned that from the jump. I absolutely think they were feeling themselves too much with the way that they beat down the first four opponents to start the season. And I know the score was closer against Oklahoma than the first three games, but they physically dominated Oklahoma within that score. So I think they were absolutely feeling themselves too much. And what you hope if you're a Tennessee fan is that this is the proper wake-up call that this team needed. Now, it's probably fair to ask, why did a team of veterans need a wake-up call? But I guess every team is its own team. Even if a guy has been around and been on the last couple, there's still different personalities in the mix and things of that nature. So even if it may be fair to ask, like, hey, why does this group of veterans need a wake-up call? It is a different team this year, even if there are a lot of familiar faces. But you can't convince me otherwise that they weren't feeling themselves too much. And Dylan Sampson had some quotes after the game that alluded to that. Keenan Peely disagreed that they were lackadaisical over the course of the bye week, but I thought it was clear. I think when you come out and play as unprepared and unorganized, and you're as sloppy as you are coming out of an open week, I think that directly points to being unprepared and not taking things seriously enough during the open date. And in this case, I think it's because you were feeling yourself too much.
Yeah, see, the reason why I was trying to say what I was going to say, and then I just lost my voice there. Right? You know this, Ben, when you have toddlers, you're just, or a toddler, you're just sick all the time, and so there's always something going around. And so let me see if I can get this out now. I think that is something that we in the business fall back on sometimes. And I think it's something that players as a quote fall back on sometimes, because it's sometimes that one of the things that you could point to and say, oh, it's that. Oh, it's that. That's what it was. And if you're a player, it can actually be helpful to look at it that way after the fact, because then you tell yourself, oh, well, if I just get dialed back in, I'm good. Right. Like that's the easiest thing to say is, oh, well, our bad. That was inexcusable. We, weren't paying it, weren't dialed in, weren't focused, weren't locked in. We'll get that fixed now. And that to me, sometimes that is the case, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes people just say that when it's not. And I don't know. I wasn't there, and I'll take Sampson's word for face value because he came out and said that. But I don't know that I'll totally buy it, because sometimes it's not that, and sometimes it's worse when it's not that. Sometimes you just didn't have a good plan. You didn't execute. You got rattled on the road. You couldn't block people, and you got beat. And there were things you could have done that you didn't do that are not just being dialed in. So I that's what I'm trying to say is if you're Tennessee now in the aftermath, you better damn well hope that's what it was, because that means that you can take this lesson and learn from it and get something sorted and make something of the season. If it's more than that, then this is another, 8 or so win team. That's what they are. And that's what I guess we'll figure out pretty soon going forward. Cause I there've been times where I've just written that and I've seen guys say that and just taking it as face value. And then in hindsight, I'm like, I don't know if that's what it was. I just think they weren't very good. And so that's what you have to hope if you're Tennessee, is that's what that was, because it's inexcusable, but you at least know what it was. And if you know what the problem was, you got a better chance of fixing that problem. And I think there were so many things that went wrong in that game, not just from the players, but from the way they were managed and the way they were put in positions in that game, that were just not good enough.
No, it wasn't. And like I've said a bunch, I don't think some of the personnel is what we thought it was, particularly on the offensive side of the football. So that is certainly a factor in this team being brought back down to earth in terms of the opinion of this team publicly. I don't think the personnel is not everybody, but on the offensive side, I just think that the personnel maybe isn't as good as we thought it was. But for the most part, I do, again, for the millionth time, I think that they were feeling themselves a little too much. We'll see if that proves to be correct, or like you said, there is absolutely a scenario where this time next month we're looking back on this game and some of the quotes and thinking, no, that was a sign of things to come. They didn't have an off night. They didn't need a wake up call. That's just who they are. That is absolutely a possibility. But I think the overall arching issue right now is that this team was feeling themselves a little too much and did not handle themselves correctly over the course of the open date, and their play reflected that tonight, in my opinion.
Yep, and that's an issue where I think most things in college ball, I often start with the coaches, because these are younger guys. These aren't pros. So even if they're treated like pros at times and paid like pros now in some ways, you look at their age, and so you go to the coaches. But what you just described, if that is what it is, that's in my mind, more on the players than the coaches. Like that's a look in the mirror type of thing. And sure, the coaches if maybe could have noticed that better and said something. And I get all that, but that particular issue is one where I think you have to take some self accountability if that's what it was. So we will see. Now Tennessee is what's a wide open SEC still, and Tennessee. This is what's so frustrating about this game. So many things so frustrating about it. But Ben, now they're home for like 5 weeks, and they would have been undefeated going into this stretch. You get everybody back, and they got to come to Neyland, and Neyland's rocking, and now you got a team that's having a lot of questions, and they're about to face a team that's not very good, but also is a program that they often play badly against. So, yeah, I mean, everything can change at the snap of a finger, right? I mean, this was almost a big bullet dodge, but nope, that bullet got you. It hit you. So maybe not center mass. Maybe you're still walking, but you're limping.
Look, it's not ideal. Everybody's down on this team at the moment, and I'd say rightfully so. But it's imperative that they flush this as quick as possible and have a good week of practice and preparation. Because if you can win these next 2 football games, especially given who it is, then all will be well in the world here in 2 weeks. Again, I don't think all will be forgiven because this to me is an unforgivable loss. And if you do turn around and beat Florida and Alabama, then the conversation is going to shift to if we would have just handled business at Arkansas. So this loss will never be forgiven. But the mood and the vibes will be infinitely better. And although it may not be forgiven, I do think that a lot of fans would trade back-to-back home wins over Florida and Alabama for an ugly loss at Arkansas, even if that means that you can achieve your overall season goal, which is to make the playoffs. And if you bounce back and beat Florida and Alabama, you'll be heading into the home stretch with a chance to make the playoffs. And at the end of the day, that is the goal for the season. And as frustrating as this is, and as much as this stings, that is still on the table, especially if you're able to battle through this adversity and bounce back with 2 huge wins over your 2 biggest rivals.
Yep, that's the last thing I'll say is that as bad as this was, it didn't take Tennessee's fate out of Tennessee's own hands. It wasn't that kind of a loss, but it really narrowed the window, and so now we'll see what Tennessee does in response to this. We'll start talking about that on Monday. We will see how Tennessee respond. We won't see practice, of course, but we'll hear things and we'll tell them to you, and we'll go talk to coaches and players both on and off the record, and we'll tell you what we hear. But this was about this sucked, and Monday will be about what now, and so we will say, right at the end of the day, it's Florida week, right? So I mean, there's something maybe that gets people going again, but a definite turd burger of an evening for Tennessee. I don't think there's a nice way to put that. So again, if you're listening here on the if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, this will be the end of the podcast. But if you're listening to it, you'll hear the outro. But for now, Ben, thanks for being here, bud.
Thanks, Wes.